there's so much I can't say regarding to what this is all about. But for me, just giving the American people a chance to decode their mainstream media source was my intended goal.
For those who have not heard of Reality Winner, my daughter is Reality Lee Winner. My daughter was charged with the unlawful transmission of national defense information. While working with the NSA, she came across a document that had the proof of the Russian attacks on our election systems in 2016. And this was at a time when our administration at that time was denying any kind of Russian interference in our 2016 election. And it was at this crucial time that my daughter took it upon herself to print a copy of that NSA report and mail it to a media outlet called The Intercept.
Naively, I thought I would change the world. I thought I would decode corporate media for the United States audience to understand you're not getting 100% of the truth. I had looked at the Washington Post secure Dropbox. However, at that moment in time, my primary source of news was The Intercept. I drank the Kool-Aid. I trusted them. I believe they were holding the government accountable.
A bunch of things went wrong. Like one of the big things that went wrong is that I didn't actually know that The Intercept was working on this at all. I was actually had just started a vacation. My wife and I were in Iceland, actually, the first day of a vacation. We were going to Europe when suddenly I saw on Twitter that this had happened and all sorts of people were blaming me for it.
I take responsibility for my decision, and I understand that the manner in which I did so placed 100% trust in The Intercept to not take a direct scan of the original document and send it to the NSA for verification.
The scanned version of the document included this metadata in it that is called printer dots. It's almost invisible little yellow dots that have the serial number and the timestamp of when it was printed. Most printers leave these printer dots. It's actually pretty incredible. You can print something in your printer and look at it really closely and you can see them.
I didn't realize that there would be no interest in protecting my identity. And I also didn't know that the information I was giving them, they had little to no interest in actually reporting it or disclosing it until they found out that I was arrested for it. The day they actually released the document was the same day I was arraigned in federal court. But this is after 2 weeks of basically assisting the NSA forensic investigation on where this document came from. So they helped that investigation for 2 weeks, probably caught wind that somebody was arrested for it, and tried to publish the document just before my arraignment, or just before the announcement of my name and what I had leaked.
This specific document, 6 people had printed it, and Reality Winner was one of those 6 people. And so even if we had done everything perfectly, if we published the document, Reality Winner still would have been on a very short list of suspects. And in this case, she was a reader of The Intercept, and she had actually written an email to The Intercept in the past. And that made her the prime suspect, even though they searched the hard drives of all 6 users. But in general, this was a really hard story to do because we didn't actually have any way we didn't know who the source was. It was just a letter that showed up in the mail. They sent out search warrants to Google. They got everything in her Google account, all of her Gmail, all of her Google Docs and everything, including a backup of her Android phone. They sent search warrants to Dropbox and to several other companies. And they basically her, I think AT&T, her cell phone provider, Facebook, They got like, records of her conversation, her Facebook messages with her sister. They got all sorts of stuff. And yeah, it was it was pretty massive. And I think this is a really good example of how things are so stacked against sources, and they don't really realize that like every little thing is being logged and all this information is available to leak investigators.
My idea was that this would be a story about the information, and this would be a story about the American people and their relationship to their news media. I never thought that the absolute worst case scenario, that this would be sensationalized around someone's identity, around my identity, would be the headline. And that's what it's been. These are the types of cards that I would make for my mother when I was in the county jail in Georgia awaiting trial. I stained the paper using instant coffee, and so I made that parchment by hand. And then I would collect leaves. So they let us outside maybe once a week. And so when I was running and exercising, on the last lap that I was allowed to do, I would grab as many leaves as possible, and I would try to draw them with as much detail. And it was kind of like my form of like meditation. I personally have never identified as a whistleblower because I was not exposing government wrongdoing. It was, I have this information on paper, and understanding especially Donald Trump's use of the media, and that it had the brand and it had the logo at the top of the page. It had top secret, it had the NSA emblem at the top. It had everything Americans needed to see to know that this was important. It had it there, and it had the truth. Everybody at NSA had seen it because it was widely disseminated within the agency. It wasn't compartmentalized. I didn't have to use any sort of illicit means to view it. Everyone was talking about it. And honestly, I did not know at the time that our elected officials didn't know what was contained in that report. So as far as the internal avenues, there weren't any to address it within the agency because it was a finished product. It was, this is a fact. There was nothing more for the agency to do about it. And so that's why the only avenue I had was to leak it, because that was the only way to get it to the American people. And that was my intention. My intention was to give it to the American people, and that was going to be the litmus test against the media. I would say that if you remember the first half of 2017, every Friday afternoon, right at that 5 p.m. journalistic deadline, there would be a leak. I mean, every Friday. And that those of us within the agency who had seen what I had seen, the talk at the water cooler was, that's going to be this Friday. That was going to be the leak. Because even members of Congress, elected officials, were leaking sensitive information. They just weren't handing off pieces of paper that could be traced to them. And they were telling it, hearsay to journalists who couldn't exactly quote them in any way that would be incriminating. But we were living at a time in this country where, very much like the release of the Pentagon Papers, 50 years before, every single Friday there would be some kind of release of confidential information. One more piece of the story. So this is painted on a bed sheet. There was a time at Federal Medical Center Carswell, where I was doing my prison time, where I was working with the people in the Recreation and the Art Center. And they asked me to paint a bulletin board for February. And so I had to get all these different postcards of pictures of the civil rights movement. And I had to get this design approved. And so I painted it basically using like elementary school grade acrylics with like the oldest brushes you have ever seen. But it made this giant bulletin board, and I just really wanted, I didn't want the inmates as much to see it as much as I wanted the guards to see it, you know, to let them know, like, what side of history are you on? And that's why I used the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, because he had done time in jails and his officers were harassing him all the time. So I kind of wanted to show them, like, you guys are not the good guys on this, you know, like, what side of history are you on? And I had done that a lot in prison. Hi, beauty. You're here. All right, this is going to be your treat if you behave. So this is our rescue horse. We got him last August. He's never worn a saddle. When we had him last summer, it was the first time his hooves ever gotten taken care of. He's completely wild, and he thinks he's a dog. United States citizens and Americans, anybody living within this country, should be very aware, very cognizant of the ability for actors within the system, whether they're domestic or foreign, to use opposing views on social media to stir up conflict and violence and to continue to polarize us. We now know that a bad actor used social media to organize opposing rallies for a neo-Nazi group and a Black Lives Matter group to take place on the same day at the same time on opposite street corners, and that it wasn't organized by either of the two groups domestically. And Americans need to understand that social media is being used as a tool to divide us, and that when people talk about misinformation, they're not talking about holistic medicine or opposing political points of view. They're talking about opposing truths that can get people into a panic or frenzy, to use fear and hysteria, to incite violence, and to overturn our democracy. This is being done domestically. It's being done by large domestic and international corporations, as well as hostile foreign nations. This is another example. People would send me postcards and I would draw them. And me and my mom, for the longest time, have always had like this owl connection. So it's just another kind of example or another piece that I would do everything possible just to make my mom smile and still be the daughter that, you know, she needed me to be, even though I was in jail. The facts contained should not have been hidden from Congress. And whether that was not my intention. My intention was the relation of Americans to their media and their relationship to the truth. But that tangible policy information is being hidden from even our elected officials. It should be the conversation.